This is Otherworldly Hearts. This was a game that I made for a college game development course. And this game went through a lot of iterations. And we only had 4 months to finish this. So, in this course, we needed to make a game that infuses local Indonesian culture into our game. And frankly, we didn't really know where to go with this. And so we brainstormed for a while, and we actually came up with some pretty interesting ideas. Like for example, a shadow fight styled fighting game but with wayang, which is like Indonesian shadow puppet. A limbo styled game but with Indonesian mythical creatures hunting you. And an Indomie stall simulator, because why not? Then, after a bit more brainstorming, we found a golden idea. An Indonesian ghost dating sim game. So for this idea, we were heavily inspired by Helltaker. And so we decided, hey, why don't we just try that but for Indonesian ghosts? So Indonesia has a ton of scary ghost folklores. So instead of making them scary, how about if we try making them cute? And so I made some concept art for the ghosts. Basically, I just started Japanizing beam at them. And now that we have a base concept, now it's time for the gameplay mechanics. So, originally we wanted to make a 2D top-down escape room type game where you need to explore an area, collect items, and figure out the ghost's name. So for this game concept, there's a time limit that's indicated by the battery icon on the top right. When the battery runs out, you go to the next night, where the level layout will change even more, so hallways could be longer and new areas could be unlocked. So basically just imagine Omori, but just the spooky night house levels. And the goal of the game was to figure out the ghost's name by guessing using an Ouija board. And for every wrong guess, the hangman will slowly appear until it... This was actually a pretty banger idea. It was looking pretty great until we realized this idea needs to be scrapped. This game was a bit too ambitious, and with our current skills, we can't finish this under 4 months. So we needed to come up with another easier game idea. So I helped to make another concept. This time it's still a top-down 2D game, but instead of having a timer, we're using a quest system on the new concept instead. So in this game, you have a list of things that the ghost wants to do before going to heaven, and so you need to help the ghost to achieve those things. So instead of being a horror game, this is more of a wholesome take on the genre. And even though this was also a pretty banger idea, we still needed to scrap this. This was still a bit too ambitious. Okay, fine. What if we don't make a top-down game? Maybe that's a bit too hard. What if we turn it into a side-scroller instead? It will be easier to make, right? And so, I made another concept. This time, it's a side-scroller concept instead of the top-down one. And it's separated into 3 acts. And for this game, you still need to help the ghost to do stuff that she needs to do before going to heaven. And it's basically the same concept as the previous one, but this time it's a 2D side-scroller. So it's easier to make, right? Nope, the same thing happened. So we basically overscoped the concept again. I mean, at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, so if everything's too hard, what's possible to make? Well, the answer was actually quite painful. We needed to cut basically everything and start from scratch. The quest system was a bit too complex, so that needs to go. Since we weren't confident in making a lot of assets, we need to just stick with basic tile maps. And since we weren't confident that we could code complex mechanics, we just used extremely simple mechanics that's seriously easy to code. And so, after we listed the ideas that we should keep, and which ideas that we should throw out, unfortunately, the dating sim idea also needs to be cut. This was one of the parts that we didn't really want to cut. I mean, this was the original golden idea. But since we're seriously overwhelmed with coding the other parts of the game, we weren't confident that we could code it in time. So, regrettably, we needed to scrap it. After going back to the drawing board multiple times, we ended up with a 2D platformer concept that's heavily inspired by Celeste. So in this final game concept, you're an exorcist that needs to save a soul from the depths of an abandoned house. To unlock new areas, you need to collect spirit orbs that opens a gate to the next area. At the end of each level, you'll collect an item that gives you a new ability, such as Ghost Companion, Double Jump, and a horizontal dash that lets you dash through hazards. And yeah, these are pretty basic abilities. They're designed so they're easy for us to code. But when paired with the hard level layout, platforming actually gets pretty challenging. Speaking of level layouts, we made them first by randomly sketching on FigJam. So we just drew random level layouts, which we later then connect together into a single cohesive level layout. Once the level layout is ready, I took them to Illustrator to clean them up a bit, and that's the level layout done. So we finally got a game concept, and the level layout is basically done. It should be smooth sailing from here on out, right? So my group has 5 people in it, including me. The problem was that none of us knew each other, so there was minimal communication between us. We didn't really know what to do next. Like, we had a Trello board, but no one was using it. And at this point, I was full on panicking. Like, I'm not even sure if we're going to be able to finish the game at this rate. We needed to move fast, otherwise it's going to be hell in the last few months. So even though I was super anxious about it, I had to step in a bit as the group's unofficial manager, and it was very chaotic and it was incredibly exhausting. But I definitely prefer this compared to just having no communication at all. We started by coding the base mechanics first, such as the player character and the dialogue system. And oh my gosh, the dialogue system! This was one of the most important systems for our game, so I had to spend a ton of time designing and debugging the dialogue system from scratch. And you may be wondering, why don't you just use a pre-existing dialogue system? Well, the answer was because I needed to add a lot of custom functions, and I'm not exactly sure how easy it was to modify an existing dialogue script. So instead of worrying if I can modify it later, I just made my own dialogue script by watching a few YouTube tutorials. And after several days of tinkering, it finally worked! The code for it is still extremely messy, like even now I'm just still absolutely confused on how most of this works. But hey, time's ticking and this will have to do for now. I also made a few expressions for the ghosts, and I also added a simple dialogue sound effect, so that's the dialogue system ready. So it turns out one of my group members can actually make music, so while we were busy coding the game, he made some music for it. He made music for every single level in the game. The main menu, and an ending music. And he definitely hard carried us on the music department, because none of us actually knew how to make music, so this was a welcome surprise. This definitely made our game feel a bit more special. For the sound effects, it was originally the job of our music composer, but unfortunately, the sound effects weren't quite there yet, so I had to step in for a bit. So I took those bass sound effects, layered a bit of sounds on top, and added some effects in Adobe Premiere. And basically I did this for every single sound in the game. And then I integrated them into the game to test if they actually sound great. And after going back and forth on editing the sound effects, they finally fit the game perfectly. And I think they sound pretty unique. So that's the game audio done. Let's skip forward for a bit. At this point, our game is mostly done. We've coded the player character, abilities, dialogue system, and we made a simple tile map and designed the level based on our level sketches. And finally, we also added music and sound effects. All that's left is just a ton of polishing, debugging, UI, and a ton of post-processing effects to make the game look great. So for the post-processing effects, I decided to lean towards a vintage CRT look, so I added effects like bloom, film grain, lens distortion, and I also added a CRT filter so it looks like it's playing back on a CRT monitor. And after a bit of polish, it actually looks pretty great. For the game UI, I was inspired by digital cameras. So every single button, menu screen, or interface elements usually have something to do with cameras, so I thought it was a pretty nice touch. So while my group members were busy doing their tasks, I got nothing to do and I was very bored. So I added Android support. And let me tell you, adding support for Android phones was not easy. I had to rewrite most of the movement system, create on-screen controls, and adjusted a lot of the UI in order to make this work. Was it worth it though? Heck yeah, it was! The game is now fully playable on phones, so I can playtest the game on the go. And speaking of playtesting, we playtested a lot. We shared our games to our friends, and oh boy, we were glad that we playtested early because we found a ton, and I mean a ton of bugs. For example, if you die too much, skill issue, the level loads more than once for some reason. And there was also another bug where you can dash during cutscenes, and at the end of the game, the most game-breaking of them all, cutscenes that won't run on PC. And this was basically the most hectic part of the process. A ton of bug reports were coming in, and the only person that I trust to fix this was myself. So I just spent a ton of time sitting in front of my PC, just fixing bugs all day long. So the final days were just spent by polishing the game a bit more, creating the itch.io page, recording and editing the game trailer, and finally, it was time to submit our game. And in the end, our game actually got first place in the game development course jam. This was actually a pretty fun experience, and I'm actually proud that we've managed to create a pretty nice game. It's not the best game in the world, but hey, it's our first step into game development. I'll be making more games in the future, so if you wanna see that, consider subscribing. So, guess that's it for now. Stay tuned for more. See ya!